Welcome to the Team DataFam Tableau User Group meeting number 37. This tug works a little bit differently to others. We cater for the presenter rather than the audience. Not to mean that we don't need an audience. A live audience is always great, but we meet at a whole heap of different times to get the best presenters around the world. All meetings are recorded and put on YouTube for later consumption. We'll talk about that later on. And check our schedule for TC presentations. We've still got a few left, and today's one of those. There's a Visit Sydney presentation coming up next week, but if anyone wants to present on anything vaguely Tableau related, please get in touch. My email is team.datafam@gmail.com. Today we have Matt and Blake presenting about the HEB Retail Media experience. As I said, a TC25 repeat for all of those people who didn't get to TC25 or didn't see this session while they were at TC25. So I'll hand it over to you guys, and you can take it from here.
All right, so yeah, a quick peek at the title here. It is From Idea to Insight, the HEB Retail Media Experience. And your two hosts for the day are going to be myself, pictured on the left, and Matt Huff. So you might be asking yourself, who is this Blake guy? I can give you a quick little resume. I am a co-leader of the Retail and Consumer Goods Tug. I'm also a new Tableau ambassador and DataFam Rising Star. I post Tableau content on my blog, Feiza Data, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn with Makeover Monday and things of the sort. And Matt, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a manager of decision science at HEB. Blake is actually one of the folks on my team, but I also co-lead the retail tug and am a brand new Tableau ambassador this year as well. And so that's a little bit about me, and we're gonna dive right in. So
yes, indeed. Oh. Perfect. So
sorry,
no worries. So yeah, a quick peek at the agenda for today. We're going to start off with an introduction to HEB. So what or who is HEB? And then we're going to go ahead and walk through our general framework for delivery from idea to insight. So a quick peek at what or who HEB is. If you're not from Texas or Mexico, there's a good chance that you probably haven't heard of HEB before. And that's because we're actually a regional grocery retailer operating in Texas and parts of Mexico. So what's so interesting about HEB? We are actually the market share leader in the areas that we operate in. We see over $40 billion in annual sales. So it is a pretty large volume company, if you really think about it. And not only that, we've been awarded the #1 grocer in the United States by dunnhumby for the last 3 consecutive years. So really, all around, HEB is a grocer that is just absolutely loved by customers, and we've been looked at as the national brand of Texas as a result of that.
Yeah, you're hard pressed to walk into an HEB and not see a Texas-shaped frying pan or whatever the case may be. But that ultimately leads to what is HEB Retail Media. That's the team that we're both on. Retail media, for folks who aren't aware, is the mechanism with which, so it's basically an up and coming process where advertisers are able to add locations across an individual retailer's website or across a broader internet. And what it allows for advertisers to do is it allows customers to connect. It allows advertisers to connect retailers' first-party data to an ad exposure. Now, historically, that has been a huge problem in the advertising and media business, and retail media is the mechanism in which a lot of the challenges with traditional media measurement are able to be resolved. Basically, what we're doing and what my team is responsible for is specifically looking at all of the different data touch points from an individual's exposure to an ad all the way through to a point of purchase across potentially thousands of campaigns. And as we look at that becomes a very big data problem. And not only a big data problem, but it becomes a situation where we really need to have a good understanding of the data stories that we want to share And that's ultimately where where design thinking comes into play, and how we think about the challenges that we're facing when it comes to communicating at scale a lot of the data stories that we need to be able to communicate. And so if you go to the next slide, we'll talk exactly about that. And so specifically, the way that we think about things is we're going to think about design as our delivery mechanism for data and for data storage. So if you go to the next slide, what we inevitably get is this question everybody's been asked, who's done anything with data reporting in any capacity, is, can we export this to Excel? And our perspective is that this isn't necessarily a problem if there is a specific use case where that is actually needed. Now, if we are getting this question because somebody's not getting the view that they need or the report that they need, that ultimately comes down to a failing in design. And ideally we can work ahead of time to correct that potential design failing. And so if you go to the next slide, there's a quote by a guy named Milton Glaser. He's the designer who designed the I Heart New York logo. He's got a whole bunch of art in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Very famous graphic designer. And this is what he had communicated was, to design is to communicate clearly by whatever means you can control or master. And as we think about design and the design process and how do we communicate that, ultimately Tableau is one of the mechanisms that we can leverage to deliver that communicate that data story through Tableau to be able to drive decisions, influence our stakeholders and all the rest. So if you go to the next. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk a lot about design, a little bit about Tableau, a little bit about data prep, but really design is going to be where we're going to spend most of our time. And just like as you're building a building, you're not just going to go and construct a building from nothing. You need to have a blueprint. Design is essentially the blueprint that connects the ideas that we have about our data and about the needs of our stakeholders. Design is the blueprint that connects the idea to that final dashboard or that final output. As we think about design in particular, it helps us understand what's needed, what are the stakeholder requirements, and connecting that what is needed to what is actually delivered. And so really the goal here is to understand the basic needs of our stakeholders and get that frequent alignment. Make sure that what we're doing and delivering and preparing meets all of the needs that they have. And so that's ultimately what design helps us do, is it helps us put a framework together that allows for us to connect those requirements, those needs, get that alignment and everything that's needed to go from that initial blueprint to final. And so what Blake is going to talk about now is he's going to talk about the application for this and how we go from this broad concept into actually executing.
Exactly that. Thank you, Matt. Yeah. So now that we've covered design as a blueprint, I do want to get into more of the tactical side. So how do we actually think about design over at HEB? And I think a good place to start is with this concept called design thinking. And I think a great place to start there is an introduction to what design thinking is. It's a term that I know I wasn't particularly familiar with prior to working on Matt's team. And to introduce the topic, it is understanding the needs of the people or the users in which you are designing a tool for. So how do we put ourselves in that end user's shoes and really understand what it is that we're trying to design for before we actually get into handing something off? So in order to go about applying this general framework that we use, we like to start with a requirements gathering process, as you would for most tasks. And at HEB, that often looks like a stakeholder interview. So when we go into these conversations, it's a whole lot of iterating around the whys, whats, and whens, right? We try to drill down and understand what the root of the request really is. Because oftentimes, if you skip this step, a stakeholder walks in and requests a data buffet. They want a little bit of everything, all the data that you could possibly imagine. And it's our job as the conductor of that interview to make sure that we boil down that request as much as possible and really control that scope. Now, a second point of emphasis that I want to make here is around documentation. As we really emphasize documentation at HEB, it serves two main purposes. The first of which is upfront. Stakeholders feel more confident in the product that you're going to provide if they know that they've been heard, and documentation allows them to get that validation upfront. Secondly, once we've actually reached the end of this process and our dashboard in this case is delivered, documentation from the initial stakeholder interviews can be extremely helpful for making an FAQ page or any sort of resource that might serve that stakeholder later on down the line. So now that we've met with that stakeholder and we understand a little bit more about the ask, the next step here is really around getting inspired. So what is it that you can create to answer that stakeholder question, and what's possible? So look around externally at places like Tableau Public, or internally as well. So ask some of your peers, have you done this thing before? Is this something that neither of us have ever seen before? Oftentimes, the problem that you're facing isn't the first time that problem has come up. So look around and get inspired and brainstorm some ways to solve whatever it is that you're trying to solve. So now I want to introduce a quick high-level peek at the process map that we use as we go about this design process here. So oftentimes we start with a physical mockup. And when we say physical mockup, we really do mean a pen and paper or a whiteboard or anything about as non-technical as possible. And the goal here is really just to reduce friction. By removing the technical components here, we're able to emphasize speed and get our thoughts out on paper quickly and iterate. So once we've done that physical mockup, we'll introduce a bit more fidelity with something digital, which enables co-development for us across teams. So in our scenario, I live in Austin and Matt lives in San Antonio. It's not super easy or efficient for me to mail him a sheet of paper that I had drawn a sketch on. So at this point, we're using a tool like Figma and starting to iterate in a digital form. And then finally, we go back to that stakeholder who we interviewed up front, and we get that final alignment. So it's worth noting that there's an arrow beneath these three rectangles, and that's really to indicate that this is an iterative process here. So that first pass for your physical, digital, and alignment might not go as planned, and your stakeholder might have more feedback. That's totally okay. You can run this loop as many times as you want until you get it right. But what's important to note is all of this prep work does happen prior to jumping into Tableau, because there's nothing worse than building a beautiful dashboard in Tableau just for your stakeholder to say, this isn't what I wanted. So with that, I do want to jump a little bit closer into some of these components here. The first of which being the physical mockups. So again, I do want to emphasize speed is really the key here. The goal is iteration. So get the ideas out as quick as possible, because oftentimes your first idea won't be your best idea. So by iterating, we're able to work through and get a whole bunch of thoughts out and pick the best one from there. So in this scenario, Matt and I had gone through and done a couple sketches for a mock logo we wanted to use, some general dashboard ideas for the layout, and then a couple charts we wanted to include for this dummy data retail media dashboard that we have today. And whether or not it's paper and pencil or a sketching app, as you can tell, Matt and I both use iPads to do these doodles, but the goal here really is just speed. So now as we enter the digital mockup component here of that process map, one thing I want to emphasize is the tool that we use is Figma, but that is by no means the right tool for the job. The right tool for the job is whatever you feel the most comfortable with. So for some people that might be Canva. I know for me, it was PowerPoint when I first started here. Pick the tool that feels the most natural to you and stick with that. So moving from there, I do want to call out as well the importance of using screenshots in your mockups here. And the reason for that is, if you're anything like me and you're not a graphic designer, making charts inside of one of these tools can be extremely difficult. So just take a screenshot from that inspiration you had earlier on in the process and slap that on top. Oftentimes that'll be enough to convey the message you're trying to tell, and we can build that chart later in Tableau much easier. So again, big emphasis here on collaboration and feedback. So working together with other people digitally is definitely the way to go. And yeah, that higher fidelity mockup is actually what we take along with us into our final deliverable here. So now that we've gone through that design process and we've received our stakeholder approval, we can go ahead and get to delivery. I'll hand it over to Matt for that component.
Yeah, and just to double down on that, really the process in what that Blake was talking about was really around how do we expedite the process in which we're getting data and something in the hands of our stakeholders so that we can get feedback, right? The feedback is going to be really important as we think about the development process, because the last thing we want to do is spend a whole bunch of time building something that isn't going to be used. And so that's where spending the time up front really, really matters. Now, once you've done your due diligence and you're good to go, the next really about delivery. And so it's no coincidence that as we've looked at what we've been talking about, we've covered 15 pages of design, and we've got one page on the actual build, right? The reason for that is because if we've done our work up front, the build process itself should actually be fairly straightforward, especially if we've been doing everything that if we've been doing the practice and the Tableau practice and the data modeling practice, we should be fairly proficient at that part. And so now the actual execution should be fairly trivial, right? Because we know exactly what needs to be done and where it needs to be done. A couple of things to keep in mind as we're thinking about delivery is the data model. There are a couple of thoughts. One of the things that we've found is that having multiple smaller data sources feeding individual components of a dashboard, while that can be a little bit more cumbersome to manage in a production deliverable, that actually has the benefit of being extremely performant for your stakeholders. So instead of passing in one massive table with all of the different grains of data that you would want, it becomes very, very clean and succinct to have those disparate data sources at that reporting layer. The other thing to keep in mind is, as you're thinking about your data model, there are times where tall data versus wide data in the Tableau make your life very, very simple or very, very complicated. And so as you're thinking about the charts and dashboard, the charts that you're going to include in your dashboard, really spend some time thinking about tall data versus wide data. Do you have a whole bunch of features that are spread across multiple columns, or do you pivot that data and have one column of features with one column of values for each of those features? Think about that and the implications that that's going to have for your data set and your dashboard. You may also want to consider things like data densification. So if you're thinking about a Sankey diagram as an example, that's something that some of our stakeholders really appreciate. You may need to think about data densification. Can we do that in should we do that in Tableau, or should we do that in whatever data prep tool we're using? The other thing that we want to think about is processing tools. So are we going to be running this code in Databricks, in Snowflake, in BigQuery, or are we going to be looking at Tableau Prep? We're going to be using a combination of all of those and starting to think about the process in which you are building that out. Now, Blake had mentioned earlier about the concept of a document that we're using to log any of these recommendations against the stakeholder requirements and all of that. This is also a really great place to start documenting some of the data model, because once you start adding in the data model needs in that document, now you've got a full-blown repository of your data model, of your data structures, of your calculations, of the requirements of the document. That's something you can hand off to your stakeholders, and they can use at their leisure. So then everybody's favorite part, once we've finalized the designs, we've prepped our data, now you get to go build your dashboard and you get to get the feedback dashboard. Now, one thing I did want to call out, and this was a process that was kind of unique for us. We typically aren't using generative AI for a lot of our processes, but one of the cool things about this is with generative AI, we can create synthetic data sources that will allow us to quickly iterate on the output tables. So in this case, we use the data mockstar from Atomico, and Blake had essentially prepped the data there. I built the dashboard and he built the Figma, and so we're able to essentially then parallelize a lot of this development, which is another really interesting component as we think about the development process. The way that we're thinking about this allows for that democratized build process. So if you go to the next slide. So just to reiterate, what are we going to do? We're gonna gather those requirements, understand what the stakeholder needs, research the best practices. This is where spending time in Tableau Public on other design websites becomes really, really fun and interesting and engaging, is because we're able to then take those best practices and apply them to dashboards that we're creating. The other thing to keep in mind here, just like Blake had mentioned earlier, take screenshots. If you've got a really complicated dashboard that you see on Tableau Public, but like one little component of it, take a screenshot of it and move it to your digital mockups. Becomes a really, really clean way of iterating quickly. The mockups. This is far and away my strongest recommendation of anything that we've been talking about so far, is really think about creating that physical mockup and potentially multiple physical mockups. It's not just one, it's multiple. Give your stakeholders the opportunity to choose from a couple of different things, because realistically, especially when it comes to data and data storytelling, a lot of our stakeholders don't necessarily know what it is that they want or what is even possible. And so helping them understand what's possible becomes really important. And you can do that very quickly in that physical mock-up without having to spend any resources other than 5-10 minutes on the physical drawing. Aligning with stakeholders, this is a no-brainer. It doesn't matter what you build. If you don't align with stakeholders, it's not going to matter because they're not going to use it. So make sure you get that alignment, and then define and prepare your data model. This will make your life much easier as you look at the build. And then finally, the fun part, everybody's favorite, is actually building that dashboard. And then if you go to the next slide, that was it. But wanted to call out, so Blake and I had both mentioned that we're co-hosts, we're co-leaders of the Retail Tug. Just wanted to give everybody a heads up. We're actually meeting this Saturday for a VizTS competition. So there's some swag involved and a bunch of fun. From what I hear, I've not done this yet, but I hear it's a good time. So you won't want to miss that. And we've got the QR code linked here for everybody's reference. And I think that's about it.
That is everything. I will go ahead and stop sharing. Hopefully, if you've scanned the QR code, I'll give you a few more seconds. And if you didn't get it by now, that was your chance. I'm going to stop sharing now. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Happy to answer any questions. Yeah, Chris has the slide, so perfect. I will be quiet.
There's a bit of talk in the chat as we went along, but it's interesting because I've always sort of said you suggest to clients that they do mock-ups, but inside Tableau, so you know what's capable. But it's also good to do it outside because it's a lot faster sometimes. When you brought up that funnel icon, I went, oh, there's going to be bands in the funnel, and then you put bar graphs in the funnel. I went, that's a good idea as well. Like there's always good ideas.
Well, and so honestly, the reason we use Figma for a lot of this is because we found that if we do the prep in Figma, we can just wipe out the data points and the BARTs, and we can use the background. So we've essentially multi-purposed that development as well.
And so on that, are you building fixed size dashboards, but you've got the size defined in Figma to begin with? Like you're almost building background image in Figma at the start? Yeah, so for us, and here's a bit of a peek behind the curtain. For us, we're generating a lot of PowerPoint presentations. And so we size our dashboard according to the PowerPoint, and then it just becomes an export button in the Tableau dashboard. Yep. So. Pretty cool. Any other questions? The chat's gone quiet all of a sudden.
Yeah, if I can, I just wanted to thank you guys for presenting that. But in terms of the documentation that you talked about, I thought that was a really great call out in terms of making sure you're documenting at those stages and things. I find that really valuable. One thing that I found with documentation as well is it prevents scope creep to some degree. That if you're getting agreement from your stakeholders about what you're building, then you can go back and say, oh, no, you signed off this document. So yeah, I think that's another great reason for making sure that you're documenting stuff in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's another purpose for that documentation I didn't really call out, is it is a contract in a way, where that stakeholder is acknowledging that everything that they said is everything that they needed, and it should be no more and no less, essentially. So it's a great add as well there, Andy.
And in the Q&A, Anne asked, what made you make the choice of putting bar graphs into the funnel sections?
Yeah, I think for this mockup in particular, Matt and I were trying to figure out a good way to show the trend throughout the funnel. So in that dashboard in particular, I think we're looking at essentially a standard conversion funnel, but we were interested in more than just maybe the band for impressions and conversions, and maybe an indicator up or down versus last year or the prior period. We really wanted to show that trend holistically. And we had the real estate in this case. There wasn't a ton of information we were trying to show on that dashboard. So we weren't really sacrificing negative space to add the context. And it felt insightful for our imaginary stakeholder request. So, yeah.
So piggybacking on that, and this was, as we're looking at those low fidelity wireframes, right? This is one of those places where you look at it and it's like, yeah, I could put a band in there, or I could do whatever I want. This is one of those places where it's like, well, if we just slap that in there, what does it look like, right? We can, if it doesn't work, we can pull it out. As going to go pull the by month, all of that data.
Yeah, definitely.
So it becomes an exercise in just being creative.
No, it's a good idea, and it's good to throw those ideas around to get the best result as well, the best answer. Okay, no other questions. Okay, we'll move on. So here's all Matt and Blake's contact details, both LinkedIn, Medium, Tableau Public, or obviously on the Retail Tug as well on the Tableau User Group website. So it's tricky with two presenters, but it's the same sort of thing. As we always do this, it's like 5 questions. I don't know if you want to answer them both or just sort of tag team, someone takes question 1, someone takes question 2. But just 5, as I said, quick questions, quick answers. There's no right or wrong. It's just personal feelings on what you think personally about the question, obviously. Who wants the first one?
Easy enough.
Or you want to answer them both at the same time?
I'm off mute, so
go ahead, Matt. I think you got the first one.
Easy. Okay.
Fair enough.
How do you ensure your Tableau dashboards are accessible to all users?
So, yeah, for us, it becomes alignment ahead of time, right? It's making sure that they've seen kind of what it is we're looking at building, and have provided feedback. We typically don't have a lot of issues in this regard, but it is something that we are very conscious of on our side, and we try to make sure that those best practices are included, even if our stakeholders aren't necessarily aware of it.
Yep, awesome. Question 2: which Tableau feature made you feel like you'd unlocked a superpower when you first discovered it?
Ooh. The first thought that comes to my mind is definitely Viz and tooltips. Yep. I think that the whole new dimension that enabled, especially considering that I could add images inside of a tooltip, really did feel like a superpower. That concept as a whole, I think, has a lot of potential, and takes a feature that is sometimes a hindrance, I feel, and really turns it into something magical.
Yep, definitely.
See, I would have sworn that he was going to say Mapplers. So
Map layers is this year's superpower. Question 3, should interactivity, so filters, parameters, actions, etc., always be obvious, or is subtlety okay?
I think it depends. So like, and here's an example. One of the things that I've done is I've used interactivity to hide explanations of a visualization behind like a question mark. And I think, and that's usually in some kind of upper right or upper left corner that is kind of out of the way. It's fairly subtle. I'm okay with something like that. Again, a lot of times I'll set parameter actions on individual components of a visualization. I'm okay with that, but ideally you're calling that out in a way, not so much in like a location on the dashboard that says, hey, here's my filter pane and all of that, but you're using color or you're using other obvious cues that make it so that it's fairly obvious, even if it isn't necessarily a space on the dashboard that is fully dedicated to that. So,
yep, perfect. And question 4, are you the type of person who spends ages perfecting formatting details, or do you focus on getting insights out quickly?
Do I have to pick one or the other on this one? I feel like there are circumstances for both.
Yep.
Yeah, for me, I think adjacent to the whole framework that we had just outlined, I feel like a massive capability with Tableau is speed to insights, just generally. And specifically for us, the ability to copy an output from Databricks or Snowflake, and then immediately paste that into Tableau and whip up a quick bar chart or line chart to understand what that table is that we're supposed to understand, is definitely not about perfecting formatting details, but it is incredibly important in our workflow. That being said, I am also the type of person that spends way too long adjusting the pixels of floating objects and playing around with the padding in my containers to make everything fit just right. So I'm going to take both on that one, but
that's fine. And I can come back to floating objects as well, but it's easy. And the last question, should all dashboards follow accessibility standards, so colorblind palettes, font size, etc., even if the users don't ask for it?
For me, Jess, now I know we've developed a couple where I would argue that specifically the font size is more of an issue. I'm one of my pet peeves, for what it's worth, is the color and making sure that color we're cognizant of that. But yeah, I think it's definitely important, especially where we can, to lean into that as much as possible.
And in the chat, someone, or Lou, just said, this is such a good question. I should actually have phrased that at the beginning. All these questions are usually generated by ChatGPT or whatever LLM I'm using today. I've obviously got to feed in the prompt, right? So all the questions are supposed to be just vague, it's your personal preference, etc. But obviously I'm feeding in the prompt. If anyone wants to help me out with that and give me 5 questions to ask people, you can see the feeling of the questions. There's no right or wrong answer. It's what you feel is best. But as you were saying on the floating objects before, is I tell a lot of people when I'm using floating objects, I just write a little cross on my page, and that's so I can have, the X and Y and the width and height numbers for my floating objects. So then as you navigate between dashboards, you can put all the floating objects in exactly the same position. And when I show that to people, they go, that's crazy. And then after a week, they go, that little cross, I use that all the time, because it's the best way to just remember those 4 numbers when you're going across multiple dashboards. But that's good. Easy. Moving on to the next presentation is on October 1st, depending on where you are in the world. So it's later in the day if you're in Sydney. That's not 10 p.m. in Europe, is it? No, I think that's 10 a.m. I've mucked that one up. Yeah, sorry, US folks, you're getting up really early in the morning for that because whatever, or watch the recording as well. But Kieran presented this at Visit Sydney this year. So if you were there in, what was that, June, good presentation. I didn't get to see it, but I'll see it next week along with everyone else. Or obviously, if you're not watching that presentation live, everything's recorded and it's on YouTube along with a whole other lot of online tugs as well. So the retail tug puts their stuff on here. We do, there's a whole heap of content there, youtube.com Team DataFam. Or if you're not near a computer, you can listen to the podcast on both Spotify and Apple. And as I said at the start, if anyone wants to do a presentation or if you've got any questions, email me at team.datafam@gmail.com. But thanks guys for that presentation. It was awesome to see how you did that whole design thinking approach. And obviously a lot of people in the audience have got tips that they can take home and use at work as well.
Happy to be here, Chris. Thanks for hosting this Team DataFam Tug, and it's an honor for both Matt and I to be speaking.
Awesome. And yeah, I won't be at the one on Saturday, but I'll watch the recording as well. I think it's like 1 a.m. in the morning for me. And if anyone wants to say anything, there's another question in the Q&A. Where is it? So Angela was saying, with HEB's omni-channel focus and retail media network expansion, what key metrics, visualizations, and filters do your dashboards prioritize to help brand partners measure campaign performance across in-store and online channels, including overall ROAS?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, it's and I obviously can't get into that too much, but I mean, generally it's your typical metrics, so impressions, clicks, conversions, those kinds of things. We do look at ROAS and that as a concept is something that we're measuring as well. So there's a bunch of different things that we're looking at, but yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at. And really the challenge for us is how do we distribute that at scale, and how do we think? Yeah, and so for that, it really is what we're looking at. We'll look at funnels of data. We'll look at the relationship between impressions, clicks, conversions, and you can build the funnel that way. We'll look at in-store transactions versus online transactions and how those compare to cost and some of that kind of stuff. And so we'll use visual cues. We'll use visual cues throughout the dashboard to group that and to group that data and kind of guide the reader throughout. And so that's kind of how we're thinking about the visualizations. On the row group level security, we're not doing a ton of that today because we're largely doing managed service reporting. So it becomes more a question of it becomes more a thing where internally we're pulling that data and then we're sending it out on our own. And so that's more of what it is than anything else. But for if we were to expose that to suppliers or whatever, that would definitely be something that we would be a little bit more concerned about.
But I think, as you touched on before, you're creating a PowerPoint deck which has got all that data in it, and possibly supplying that back to advertisers and people who are interested in, they're not logging into Tableau to consume that. They've been given a PowerPoint deck.
Yep. Yeah. And so the nice part about it is, like, you can imagine a world where our account executives are they're extracting that PowerPoint on their own fairly easily and sending it off.
Yep. So, any more questions, feel free to type in the chat. You can also come off mute at any time. So Bart said, did you start with Tableau or did you consider any other BI tools?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I mean, from when I had started at HEB, we were already all in on Tableau. But Matt, I don't know if you had any different experience prior to me. Oh,
yeah.
And he is.
And he just disappeared.
Well, I will field that fully then. Yeah, we did in fact start with Tableau during my inception at HEB Retail Media. which I am so thankful for because I love the tool, and that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, exactly. It's helped a lot of careers along the way.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. So I'll probably wrap it up there. Again, thanks, guys, for the presentation. Thank you for your time. Awesome to see that. And yeah, keep in touch in the future.
Will do. Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
Thanks both.